vegetation ecologist. And so, I don't know if we all have different titles. And it's always like, how did they come up with that? But anyway, she formerly worked with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. And then previous to that, I guess, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. So anyway, there's no, we'll, I guess, she said that people can interrupt her as she speaks. She says her talk is about 40 minutes. And so there still will be time afterwards to have questions. So I would sort of say most people maybe should wait to hear her finish before we ask questions, unless there's something that's glaring, like I can't hear you or something like that.
You
But
can
anyway,
also drop them in the chat too.
yeah,
Excuse me.
yeah. So again, thank you, Kerry, for joining us tonight, and it's all yours.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. So I'm gonna throw up my slides. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right, awesome. So welcome and thanks for coming out tonight and listening to me talk about some of our vegetation work that we're doing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our rare, threatened, and endangered species and some of the things that I'm working on in addition to invasives. And hopefully I'll drum up some interest in visiting some of our cool sites in Prince George's County. So a little bit about where I work. I'm over with the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, MNC-PPC. So there's the Montgomery Parks Division that you're probably really familiar with. And then on the Prince George's side, we have Prince George's Department of Parks and Recreation. And so historically, the Prince George's side is mostly focused a lot on their recreational opportunities. They don't have their biological sciences program built out quite like the Montgomery Parks side. But in 2023, they established the Park Planning and Environmental Stewardship Division, and that is the division that I am in. So our division chief is Sonia Ewing, who's right there in the front of the picture. This is Suitland Bog, one of our premier sites that we took staff out to this past May and just did, a little professional development day. So those are some of my awesome coworkers there on the Suitland Bog boardwalk as we were hiking around and looking at all the rarities. So in the park planning and environmental stewardship section, we're still quite new in the whole division world. And so we have folks who are working on land acquisition. We have folks who are working on trail planning and trail maintenance and those types of projects. We have folks who are doing the environmental planning, so helping to plan out the sites and recreation resources on our different parklands, but also working with communities and planning some of those recreation opportunities as well. So my position is also brand new. So the new division and then new vegetation ecologists. So most of the folks that I work with are planners, and I'm an ecologist. So it's a little bit of a learning curve for everyone on the team. I was hired this past January, and some of the work that I'm doing is vegetation inventories. So I'm looking at some of the plant communities that I'll talk about in a little bit, as well as our rare, threatened, and endangered species, including cool stuff like Wister's coral root, a rare orchid that you can see there at the bottom of the screen, and the top of the screen that was me this past spring with a little wildflower called single-headed pussy toes. So we have a lot of these RTNEs, as we like to call them. And of course, invasive species are a big problem that threaten a lot of those populations. And so I'm also simultaneously working on invasive species management. Some of that is managing some of these larger contracts to work on some of the huge needs that we have. And then eventually I'll be managing a weed warrior program. It's very similar to Montgomery Parks, which I think many of you are familiar with. So really excited to kind of jump into this journey. And as Walter mentioned earlier, I come from Department of Natural Resources, and some of the sites that I've been doing inventories in, I visited 15 years ago as a budding biologist with DNR. So it's kind of nice to come back on different terms and revisit some of my old friends. So natural communities are assemblages of plants. And so we're looking at, the plants in these forest systems, like our overstory species, our understory species, the shrubs and the herbaceous layers, or if you're thinking about meadows, the dominant vegetation and all of those. These are really important to classify because ultimately the plant communities are going to support the animal communities that we find in different places around in Maryland. And so what I've been doing is these rapid assessments of plant assemblages, going out to some of our sites that have those rare, threatened, and endangered species, or potentially high quality habitats that we want to conserve, and just doing this rapid work. I'm not doing plots. If you're familiar with plots, I'm just kind of going out there and writing down the vegetation in the different layers and using this Nature Serves community classification system that most of the states use to classify, the different types of communities. And some of these plant communities are rare, just like the species that they support. So the picture on the left is a pine barren remnant. And so that's a rare plant community. It's a pine ecosystem. You don't see quite as many of them in Maryland, but in Southern Maryland, obviously we have that excellent coastal plain habitat. And so this pine barren remnant is a fire adapted system. And if you can see on those trees, there was a fire that had swept through several years ago. I don't know when, still have to try to dig up information, but this area is very close to the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, BARC, which also supports a very similar habitat. So at one time, that area was probably connected to the BARC facility, or where BARC sits now, but now 295 splits it. So we have that habitat. We've got some amazing wetlands on the wetter side of things. This is a river scour wetland that I visited along the Patuxent. And what I thought was cool is there are two different species of horsetails in this area. So that was just a really neat find as we were hiking around and looking at some of the really cool properties that we have within our park system. So these areas and those plant communities support a whole host of rare, threatened, and endangered species. And much like how NatureServe has these communities that, community assemblages and all of that, they also have a global ranking system and a state ranking system for rarities. And so it's a 1 through 5 system, with 1 being the rarest of the rare and 5 being common. And the nice thing is that most of the state natural resource agencies use this NatureServe ranking system. So an S1 species or a highly rare species, that ranking means the same across different states that use that system. So if you see like S1 or G1 or something like that, you can kind of understand a little bit more about that level of rarity and that ranking. So on the global scale, we have things, again, 1 through 5. Don't have too many globally rare species in Prince George's County, but we do have state rare species. And one note about those global ranks and state ranks, something might be like a G1, S1, which would be the rarest of the rare species, but they don't come with legal designations. So it's only if at a state level or federal level that these plants or organisms are classified as threatened or endangered that will give them those legal protections. So just throwing that out there. So just yesterday, I was hiking through quite a bit of brush looking for this really cool fern that we have in Prince George's County. And I know we have it in Anne Arundel County, and it might be in Montgomery as well. I'd have to look at the maps. But this is actually a vine, and it's a fern. So it's an evergreen fern, has these finger-shaped fronds. And these are actually the little fertile fronds in this photo here. So this is a state rare species, but it also has a threatened status, and it likes to usually be found in these wetter areas. And so that comes with additional protections for those wetlands. So this time of year, it's kind of hard to see in a sea of green where this little vine is growing. So I'm going to go back in the wintertime and hope that I'm more successful. But it was still nice to get out and look at the habitat, and something to keep an eye out for too. Sometimes we have really small populations of this climbing fern, and it's really easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for. We have things like this Virginia iris out at Lake Artemisia, which is really interesting. Lake Artemisia near College Park is an artificial lake, like many of the lakes in Maryland, but this one was built I think in the late 80s or something like that. But we do have some watch list plant species that have colonized in there, including the Virginia iris. And when I say watch list, it's not like high up on that state rare list, but we're kind of watching it because it might need additional protections into the future if things don't change for it. So we have quite a few orchid species here in Maryland, and some of them are rare, and some of them are found in Prince George's County. I think there are over 50 species of orchids in Maryland, and one non-native orchid. Does anybody know what that one is? We've got it in both counties, unfortunately, and it could be kind of on the verge of being invasive. It's the Helberine orchid. So yeah, I'll have to show you some pictures of it a little bit later to keep an eye out for it. But the rare orchids that we have the southern rain orchid, which is a wetland species. And then really, it's really hard to see though, because it's green in a green environment. But the rose pogonia orchid really, really stands out. And you can see it at cool spots like our Suitland Bog. So I was trying to look in the Sligo Creek watershed for rare species records, and at least on the Prince George's side, and I didn't see any directly along our parks there in Sligo Creek, but I did see some close by records that might be, of interest because they might be on some of these properties, but we just haven't had folks looking for them. And one of them is this cute little flower called spurred butterfly pea. It's going to bloom in late August, September. So it's a later species. It's a viney purple pea species. And it has this like little spur, if you can see right there on the picture. So it's got actually decently sized purple flowers. Now there is the butterfly pea, which is the Clitoria mariana, which is common, that looks very similar. And so if you look at the top right there on that photo on the left, it says corolla tube. That's the little tube that holds the petals there. All the petals are part of the corolla. So the butterfly pea is going to be purple and it's going to have that long corolla tube. The spurred butterfly pea, the rare one, is not going to have a long corolla tube that you can like notice with the naked eye. And it's going to have this little green thing that we call a spur. So if you're not familiar with looking for these types of things, what you could do is just take photos of it from like the front and from the side of the flowers, and that's enough to help with identification. So yeah, just keep that in mind if you're out and you see some purple flowers that are not kudzu or princess tree or something like that. If they look like a viney pea, take some pictures and send them out to me. There are also, if you're into dragonflies and damselflies, there are a number of watch list species that are found in the Sligo Creek watershed. And this is a little bit outside my area of expertise, but I found some from a local entomologist, Adrian Vanderbeek. And this is one, the great spreadwing damselfly, which might be easy to see. So damselflies are related to dragonflies. They're both in that Odonata order. But the damselflies typically have a space between their eyes, so their eyes are on the sides of their head instead of right there in the front with those big, big eyes. And typically, most damselflies, when they land, they're going to put their wings up and together, whereas most dragonflies are going to land and spread their wings out. As you might notice from this name and the pose that this damselfly is doing, this is called a great spreadwing because a lot of because unlike most of its damselfly cousins, it is going to spread out its wings when it lands. It's a larger damselfly too. A lot of damselflies are really, kind of small and dainty-ish. But in the damselfly world, this is a little bigger and it's got some unique markings there on the thorax. So keep an eye out. This might be, a species that you might see in the Sligo watershed. And it's one of those, like, these things are really important because a lot of these rare dragonflies and damselflies really require good water quality to be able to breed. So it's kind of one of those indicator species in some of those different environments. So one of the things that I'll be using this information about these rare, threatened, and endangered species and cool communities is trying to launch a best natural areas program similar to Montgomery Parks. And at the Maryland level, we have the Maryland Natural Areas Program. If you're not familiar with it, it's like 30 really awesome sites to visit across the state. So we want to highlight some of these really cool habitats that we have in Prince George's County. And at the moment, the old map on the right-hand side of the screen, that is these special conservation areas that people identified a long time ago, but it doesn't have all the data that I have. So we're going to revisit these special conservation areas and try to add some different criteria onto this. And so we haven't settled on the criteria yet for best natural areas, but we want to look at places that have large intact forest or habitats that are protected. Any rare natural features, whether it's rare, threatened, and endangered species, special communities, unique geology, those types of things, and anything that's really going to support high water quality in these areas. So some of these really interesting wetland systems and complexes and all of that. Those are kind of like our tentative criteria for best natural areas. And certainly we have a few spots that seem like they're going to fit really, really well. And one of them is Suitland Bog, which is a globally rare gravel terrace bog. And it's a really, really cool environment. If you haven't been to it, I highly suggest it. And I'm giving a hike there on Sunday, so I'll have some more details a little bit later. So, all right. And I see Michael mentioned that there is a climbing fern record historically from the Sligo watershed. So even more of a reason to keep an eye out for that climbing fern, that viney fern. And he also mentioned there are 2 sightings of that non-native broad-leaved helberine orchid. And so considered naturalized rather than invasive. Yeah, I mean, it's not one that I've seen like dense colonies of it. I've seen it in other states where helberine orchid is considered to be invasive. So it's definitely one of those that we're just kind of watching. So thanks for that information. Okay, moving along, Watkins Regional Park is another one of these areas that we're probably going to recommend as a best natural area. I remember when I was doing my field work in when I first started at DNR years ago, and I had gone to school out in Western Maryland and West Virginia, and then I came down to the coastal plain, and I was really sad that all these habitats didn't have all of these spring ephemeral wildflowers that I was so used to up in the mountains. And then I went to Watkins Regional Park one day and I was just like, oh my gosh, look at all the flowers. It was amazing. And of course, there are rare flowers there too, including this one, Koval Specialia, which is also in Montgomery. Like Prince George's in Montgomery County probably have the largest populations of this plant anywhere else. It's a floodplain species. It's a really tiny ephemeral plant. And if you didn't know any better, the way that it carpets the ground in some of these floodplains, it would almost look like it was an invasive species, just because it's very, very thick in some areas. So it is a globally rare species and it is ranked as threatened here in Maryland. And you can find it all around Watkins Regional Park, right behind kind of the nature center. So I've zoomed in on their map. Watkins Regional Park is in Upper Marlboro. If you're familiar with like the Six Flags and all of that, that will be closing soon, it's in that area. But right around that woodland trail and this upland trail is where you'll see all those spring ephemerals. And that's the area I'm going to focus in on, that best natural area, not the whole regional park, because there's a lot going on there. So they've got that. They've got a few other wildflowers of interest, including this little watch list species. This one right here on the right, this is called large-seeded forget-me-not. So it's an uncommon or S3 watch list species. And right next to it is the non-native forget-me-not. I forget which one this was, but all the non-native forget-me-nots have blue flowers and the native one has white flowers. But those are little wildflowers. They're super, super fuzzy and you can find them in different areas. Last thing I'm going to say about Watkins Regional Park is there is some old growth in that area too. It's right by a really cool old growth, designated old growth forest, which is called Belt Woods, that is owned by the Department of Natural Resources. Moving further east to Patuxent River, we own lots of property along Patuxent River. I think we're actually the largest landowner there in the Patuxent river, which is really awesome because it's amazing watershed. And so in the Jug Bay Natural Area, used to have like one of the largest breeding populations of ospreys. You can still see breeding ospreys there. It's a great experience, but as you know, ospreys are having some struggles at the moment that we're still trying to figure out. In the Jug Bay Natural Area, what I like, so this is on the Prince George's side. You might be familiar too with Jug Bay Wetlands Sanctuary, which is owned and managed by Anne Arundel County. So we have county agencies on opposite sides of the river and protected land, which is really, really awesome. And on both sides, there's this really nice marsh boardwalk that you can kind of walk along these tidal marshes and really get to experience how cool these places are. So the Patuxent River Park side and the Anne Arundel County side, there is this rare wildflower red turtlehead, which is a cousin of the white turtlehead that is the host plant for our Baltimore checker spot or the Maryland state insect. Red turtlehead is not a host plant for it, but it's still really cool and supports other species. And in other areas of the park, that really rare orchid can also be found in some of those large wetlands that are protected by this complex. So cool spot if you haven't been out there. Moving on to the last spot that I'm going to cover before I jump into some of our invasive species is Charles Branch Conservation Park. And I mentioned earlier that we work on land acquisition in addition to things like trail planning and planning for our different parks. And this was a very large win that just recently happened. Over 500 acres that were slated for development got to be purchased by the Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission, and we're creating a conservation area from it. So this area, hopefully, this is in Upper Marlboro. It's right by Patuxent River Park. So if you continue down Pruim Road, you can actually go over to Patuxent River Park. I think it's like right here that you make that turn towards Patuxent River Park, but it's got a lot of great habitat, and I've been out a couple times on it so far, and I just can't wait till we can start bringing people officially out there. We need to get some parking and a few other things and the trails finalized, but we're hoping this will be open to the public by this fall. But it's a really, really nice spot, some beautiful forests, some old growth potential in there. Well, I should say older trees. There have been some areas that have been historically farmed and things like that. And there are a number of orchids, common orchid species like pink lady slippers and crane flies and putty roots and all sorts of stuff. And it's another really wonderful ephemeral wildflower spot. So again, can't wait to start taking people out there and showing them how awesome this place is. So unfortunately, all of these places are affected by invasive species, and those are those non-native problematic species. So you might call them NNIs over on the Montgomery side. We just call them invasive species. It's the same thing, essentially. So we're dealing with these things, like this is Colmar Manor, and the trees that are completely covered with these vines. And as you probably know, if we don't do anything within 20 to 50 years, we can lose those mature trees and that canopy, which is a loss of that long-term ecological investment in our different systems, causes all sorts of problems. And some of these invasive species aren't just ecological problems. Sometimes they're also human health related problems. And that dreaded Japanese barberry, well, researchers have found it supports tick habitat, and in areas of high infestation, you see higher incidences of Lyme disease. So, that's that human health connection, and yet another reason of why we need to deal with these invasive species in our landscapes. But in our park system, so I went from the state to national, and then I was like, oh, it'd be great just to focus on a county and just kind of hone on down. And then I got to Prince George's and I was like, oh, we have over 500 properties and close to 30,000 acres. And we keep adding to that. I was like, that's a lot of land. So as you might imagine, being the sole vegetation ecologist, trying to get my foot in the door with all of this, and realizing that we're probably about 20, 30 years behind a lot of our counterparts in terms of invasive species management. we have a lot to work on. And so I've built out a framework to kind of prioritize different spots to work on with invasive species. And a lot of that I've been leaning on my counterparts in Montgomery Parks and talking to them and others. And so the three main buckets of priorities are protecting our assets, both natural resource assets like those rare, threatened, and endangered species and high quality forests, but also we have a number of cultural and historic assets that we manage in our different properties. So we want to take care of those. We also want to be sensitive to the community, who pays our salaries and all of that. We want to make sure that these areas are safe and welcoming and aren't being problematic for going outside and utilizing these spaces. And then we also want to focus on things like early detection and rapid response, which is what I'm going to focus a bit more on with the next few slides. So early detection, rapid response is essentially in the invasive species world is when something is at a low infestation level, you detect it early on, and then you go in and try to remove it. And this is that typical invasive species curve that we kind of look at in the invasive species world. A lot of times, by the time the public becomes aware of these invasive species, it is already too late to effectively control them. It's going to be super expensive, and we might not be able to completely eradicate them, but just kind of keep them at lower levels. And I think a great example of this is the spotted lanternfly. Many of us in the ecology world have known about the spotted lanternfly for quite a few years now, and by now everybody knows about the spotted lanternfly, but there's no like good management options at the moment because it's just so heavily infested in these different areas. So typically you want to catch it early, and sometimes that requires being overly careful as well in that process, because as you might know, not all non-native species become invasive, but when they start showing those signs of escaping cultivation and getting into natural areas, that's when my spidey senses start tingling. So my kind of loosey-goosey EDRR, or early detection rapid response criteria, we've got like less than 20 occurrences in the county that we know about, at least, and typically 10, less than 10, those are high priorities. It's something that, if we could just keep it out of the county, we're good, right? Or on some of our properties, low-level infestations or new infestations. So Watkins Regional Park just had its first reports of lesser celandine. So that is one of my EDRR priorities, because in many areas, the lesser celandine is out of my control. I can't manage it, but there's very small patches that we know about at Watkins. And so I'm going to try to go in heavy-handed and take care of that before it spreads to the rest of that area. So we're looking at, the low numbers of infestations, or, new areas that some of these invasive species move into. We're also looking at some of these sleeper species. And they're sleepers because of things like climate change. It's changing the environment and allowing some of these species that, as things get warmer and wetter, some of these things that usually like to sit in the gardens or where they planted and all of that, they're starting to jump and spread. A good example of one that we're kind of keeping an eye on right now, Coosa dogwood. So this Coosa dogwood is from Asia. It's been heavily planted all around because our native flowering dogwood got hit really hard with anthracnose. The Coosa looks very similar and doesn't get anthracnose. Now we're getting some reports that Coosa dogwoods are escaping cultivation and showing up in natural areas. And so that's like raising up the little antennae that like, hey, maybe we need to start watching this. And if it starts showing up in our natural areas, that might be one of those EDRR priorities for that species. So a lot of the EDRR stuff is really utilizing folks like you who are out there on the ground taking pictures and asking questions about what you're seeing out in the field. Because again, 500 properties, 29,000 acres in Prince George's. There are a lot more of you than me, and you're seeing things differently and going to different areas that I'm going to. So I'm using iNaturalist a lot to help with this program. So if you're taking those photos and putting them up on iNaturalist or EdMaps, if you're a little more invested, then that's great, because that's what I'm pulling from and others are pulling from. So I'm going to go over a couple of these species that I started to create these ID cards for. And the ID cards are in this wakelet that I'm going to post in the chat. So you can download them. And if you need them in a different format, just let me know. I'd be happy to provide them, and hoping to get sets laminated and given out to folks. But one of the species that I'm starting to see, and this is a newer species to me, is this false holly or osmanthus. As its name suggests, it looks a lot like holly, but it isn't in the same family as hollies. So hollies have alternating leaves where the leaves kind of alternate on the stem. This false holly is actually in the olive family, and so it has opposite leaves. And so, excuse me, if you see something that looks kind of like a holly tree, but if you look at those, and the leaves are a little spikier or spinier than what you're used to, and you notice that they are opposite from one another, that's probably false holly. This is a species we don't have a lot of records for, at least on iNaturalists. And I just see it like a little bit here and there in some of our parks, but it's at a point where we could go in and cut it and apply herbicides and get rid of it in these different areas before it starts fruiting and spreading a bit more. So this is one of my EDRR species that I'm hoping to start working on. Chinese holly is very similar looking, and I need to put this on, like create a little card for Chinese holly. So Chinese holly here is over here on the left-hand side, and this is our Native American holly. And when you look at the leaves, the American holly is much spinier, and if you see the spines, they're a little bit more regular intervals, whereas the Chinese holly tends to have these kind of long leaves, and they have these like almost like long C-shaped sinuses. Do you see that in that picture? Those big C-shaped sinuses. When you see it out in the wild, you'll just know it feels different than our American holly because of those long, almost like rectangular shaped leaves and all of that. So, and it typically has like the 30 spines at the tip, right? So almost flat across with 3 spines, whereas the spines are a little bit more differently distributed in our Native American holly. So this one is a holly, so it's going to have those alternating leaves, but look for those big C-shaped sinuses there on the sides of the leaves. And so this is one that we're starting to see in our different areas. And I was just at a site yesterday that had both of these species. So sometimes both of them end up in the same spot too. Another one that is holly-like, but this is actually in the barberry family. So this is a relative of Japanese barberry, is leatherleaf mahonia. It's also known as Beal's barberry, and it has these long compound leaves. So the leaves themselves are actually made up of a bunch of leaflets that look like holly, but they're super long. And I should have a picture, but if you look at the underside, they're this kind of white cast. We call it glaucus on the other underside. So if you were to rub your finger on it, some of the white would rub off the underside. So most of them grow about like 6 feet tall, and then they have this terminal spike of flowers. And this one was planted a lot and still is planted a bit for honeybees because it flowers in like February. So it's a good, or I shouldn't say good, but it's an early nectar and pollen source for early emerging things like honeybees and all of that. And then this time of year, you're going to start to see those characteristic bluish berries that change in color. And so those are what's really getting spread around. Much like Japanese barberry, if you're familiar with it, if you look at the inner bark, like if you break a stem or scrape the bark on it, it's going to have bright yellow inner sap. So that is going to be a good indicator that this shouldn't be here. So that bright yellow berberine on the inside is what you're going to see at the leatherleaf behonia. This one's kind of on the edge because it is really showing up in different spots, but I still feel like in most areas the infestations are low enough that we might be successful with this. So moving along to a species that is very prevalent where I live in Anne Arundel County, but not quite as much in some of the other areas. This is Scotch broom. And so this is a species that looks like kind of like in the wintertime and things like that, it looks like a twiggy clump of grass, like green grasses and everything. But this time of year, you're going to start to see those big yellow pea-like flowers on it. If you look a little closer, it's got the three parted leaves and these angled stems, and it's super, super hairy. And then eventually it gets these little peas to it. So that is the Scotch broom. This one is still being sold quite a bit in our different nurseries. So it is one that I see a lot in Anne Arundel County, but I don't see it quite as much in Prince George's just yet. So I feel like this would be as a good, EDRR species for our county. When we get to some herbaceous or non-woody things, one of the things that I have seen records for in the Sligo watershed is Italian arum. And this one scares me a bit because those woody species, a lot of them can be cut and you can do or some of them are small enough that could be cut and you can apply herbicides to and be really effective with. Or some of them are small enough that you could use a weed wrench and just pull them out. Like I've pulled out a lot of those leatherleaf barberries. Sometimes I just travel with gloves and just yank them out of the ground. And my husband's like, let's hike. Let's just hike. But sometimes the rage just fills you when you see these things out there where they're not supposed to be. But Italian arum has one of these fleshy kind of root storage systems. And so it's not something you can easily pull. And it's definitely one that you really, really want to catch early to limit the amount of herbicides and management that you're going to do. It's very, very characteristic, easy to ID. It looks like, a tropical plant because it often has those variegated, showy leaves there and all of that. Sometimes it will, the flowers can just kind of look like one of those peace lilies, if you're familiar with them, as common household plants and all of that. When it gets to the fruiting stage, it's harder to distinguish from our native Jack in the pulpits, which are in the same family. But if you see it in these leaf stages, right, which you'll see this time of year too, keep an eye on it. If you see it, report it as soon as you can and where you saw it and all of that. And this is definitely one that we want to come in and try to manage before it starts to become a really big spreading pile of it. So another one that this one has been kind of a sneaky species. So this is Asian jump seed, and I think locally Virginia was the first to kind of raise up the alert about this one. It looks a lot like our American jump seed, especially in these younger phases. I always called it like spotted tear thumb or whatnot because it looks like somebody had like a little bloody thumbprint on a leaf, right? In those early stages. And the American jump seed can look like that. When it gets older though, the American jump seed loses that red on the leaf and the Asian jump seed though keeps it. So it's also known as painter's palette as another name for this Asian jump seed. And so if you see something that looks like the jump seed that has those bright red splotches, especially this time of year, the American jump seed should not have those splotches. This time of year, if you see that and you see like these pinkish flowers or whatnot, that is one to document and let people know about. And this one, just like the Italian arum, if it's not dealt with quickly, it can really spread in some of these areas. So that's why it's one of those early detection things. Few other species that I haven't built out informational cards for, but fountain grass. This is ornamental grass. This is hard to ID except late in the summer when you start to get these seed heads. So this time of year, you're starting to see these seed heads. They kind of look like, if you're familiar with boxtails, and those like poofy seed heads, but it has more of a darkish, brownish, blackish color to it. So another name for it is black fountain grass. Pennisetum is another name for it. There's a whole bunch of names for it. But if it has these, it's clumpy, it has those fuzzy seed heads, and it's kind of brownish, blackish in color, that should raise up your suspicions that you might be looking at something that shouldn't be there. And so unfortunately, we have quite a bit of this planted at our headquarters building at the moment that I am hoping to deal with in the future. But it gets planted a lot, and because it is pretty. That's how a lot of these things get spread around. A new one to me as of a couple weeks ago is this cypress spurge. And I looked on iNaturalist, and there are not very many records of it. But we have one in Prince George's County down in the southern region at Birchwood Park. And if you're familiar with the spurges, the euphorbias, and all of that, they have sort of fleshy kind of leaves. This one has whorled leaves, so they encircle the stem, and the spurges all have milky sap. So if you're looking at something and it looks kind of sus, and you break a leaf and it's got milky sap, that might be a clue that it could be one of our spurges. We do have native spurges, but this one with those special little whorled leaves, it looks very, very distinct and grows in big colonies. So that's one that we want to also see and find and get rid of very quickly. And then in the northern part of the county, we're dealing with this new species, two-horned trappa. So you might be familiar with water chestnut, which has been in Maryland and Virginia for quite some time. This is a relative of the water chestnut, and this one is starting to show up in places around like the Anacostia watershed. I think it's Anacostia. It's not on any Prince George's parkland yet, but it's hydrologically connected to several of our parklands. And certainly with a lot of the flooding that we've been happening, there's going to be a possibility that this is going to show up. So it has those distinct rosettes of leaves that float on the surface. So keep an eye out. There are a whole bunch of people in the region who are trying to find these early infestations and get rid of them as quick as possible. And I think one of them is at Greenbelt Lake. Now that I'm thinking more about it, I think it's Greenbelt that has it, and they've had an active removal program, and they're trying to figure out exactly the best ways to eradicate it because it's so new to the region. And we think even to the country, unfortunately. So what do we do about all of this stuff? So in Montgomery Parks, I know they have some reporting systems, and we're just starting to get ours up and going. So I want to know about new infestations of old species. As I said, Watkins Park, it was actually someone with, oh gosh, I can see her face, but I'm not remembering now. The Sierra Club, I'm forgetting her name. I'm going to remember it like 10 o'clock tonight. But Sierra Club alerted up me and the park manager at Watkins that they saw some new patches of lesser celandine showing up. And that's when went and investigated and said, yes, this is it. And it doesn't look like that much that we can't handle right now. So, there are new spots that are getting invaded with things like stiltgrass, with kudzu, wavy leaf basket grass, and all of that. If you frequent parks and you just see, something that hasn't been there before, small patches of it, if you could let us know, that is going to be really, really helpful because, again, eyes and boots on the ground. And so I am hoping I have this ArcGIS Survey 123 form that's just getting ready to wait for the go time that I can launch it to the folks. But essentially, it's a little app that you can download on your phone, and you can just write, click the date, the time. There's a little location button, so you click that and you kind of take your point, and you can tell me a little bit about what you see. So Montgomery Parks is using something very similar. We built this form just like their form, makes it as easy as possible. And then what helps is it goes directly to me. And then I can see that data as soon as it comes in. So I'm hoping to deploy that soonish. It's just waiting. And then for the time being, though, I am using iNaturalist. So things are getting uploaded to iNaturalist. And if there are some of those EDRR species, there's this Invader Detectives program with the National Capital Prism that's Maryland, DC, Virginia, in that area. And we're all sharing information. So that, those iNaturalist reports are getting to folks and all of that. And then you can also just email me directly. So that's another way to kind of reach out and let me know about this information until I get some of the stuff coming up and all of that. So we do have some contractors who are going to be doing some work starting next week at Cottage City Park, right there along the Anacostia. In College Park, we'll have some contractors working at the Rhode Island Trolley Trail off of Albion Road. And then later in August along Bladensburg Waterfront Park, there's going to be some work happening. So these are really exciting to have some of these contracts go on. And just so you know, some of the spots that we're dealing with, this is Rhode Island Trolley Trail, and that is my coworker in a sea of wisteria. Like this is all wisteria. So that's one of the reasons why we're bringing in contractors, because some of these are just way too much for us to handle. I'm hoping to activate some volunteers at a couple spots that we have some active projects happening. So kind of using volunteers along with some of the other management activities that are happening at these spots, and places like Public Playhouse right off of 202 Community Native Planting Project got a grant, and they'll be rehabilitating some of that area starting sometime in August. So excited to see that work happen too. So I keep saying this, but eventually we will have a Weed Warriors program very similar to Montgomery Parks, and it will have volunteer work days, open volunteer work days. I was hoping to launch the virtual training to get this started in mid-August, but it looks like that date is going to be pushed back a bit. But I will, it's so close to being ready, I promise. And we're going to do reciprocal certification. So if you've been certified in Montgomery Parks, I'm not going to make you do the whole process all over again. Okay, so I'm going to be working with Corinne Stevens, who runs the Montgomery Parks program, and talking to her and trying to make sure you still have to sign up with our 2 different volunteer management systems, but we're going to try to make it as seamless as possible, at least as much as we can, with 2 government systems that have to talk to one another. And then eventually I just applied for a grant to also help with a supervisor training program. But in the meantime, we've got folks like Meredith Prescott with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network and a few other groups who are activating on our lands and working on this stuff. So if you really, really want to get involved, you can check them out. And I've got their information on the Wakelet that you can find there. So just last things, we have World Bog Day coming up on Sunday. So we're going to do some guided hikes at Suitland Bog. It is going to be rain or shine, but not thunderstorms or shine. So we'll be closely monitoring that. There's some more information on the Wakelet, but essentially just come and we'll do a hike and you get to see the pitcher plants and a few other cool species there at Suitland. And then in September, on Saturday, September 13th, we're getting together with the Anacostia Watershed Society for their annual BioBlitz. And we're going to have it at Lake Artemisia there in College Park. So we've got a really awesome group of folks who are going to be leading some different hikes, birds and insects and fish and reptiles and amphibians and stuff like that. So we'll have Meredith with CCAN there, maybe you do some invasives removal. With sky's the limit, but Saturday, September 13th is that date. And I went on a little longer than I expected, but thank you. I will take additional questions and I'll look at some of these questions in the chat. So I see Michael's question at the moment. Will we allow volunteers to use herbicides on invasives or selected species? So this is going to be a touchy subject because there are a lot of pesticide laws and herbicide laws, and we've got the risk management and all of that. So for the time being, no, we're not going to have volunteers applying herbicides on invasives on our properties. Right now, what we're looking at is trying to get volunteers to help with cutting the vines and some of these shrubs. And then in the case of CCAN, folks are coming in and doing those cuts. CCAN is letting us know where the work has been done, and the next day or day after, we're having our rangers go out and treat those vines. So we're hoping to kind of get a better rhythm of like having the volunteer events and then that herbicide application by trained staff afterwards. But for right now, no volunteers and herbicides. So
Well, I'm hoping, Carrie, that we could coordinate with you all, because one of our frustrations in Montgomery Parks is that we would like to have more coordination related to the herbiciding application and our weed warriors. So
mhm.
we're hoping to get maybe some support in the Sligo watershed, where we could maybe, like I like the idea of, we come in, um, and do a work day and then have you all follow through, because it is frustrating to go back to the same site over and over and over again, because we're not getting the support. Um, I know in Montgomery Parks, they seem to put most of their contract support in, I guess, we call it the best sites, or the
Best
best
natural
habitat,
areas.
best natural areas. Um, I mean, are you going to be looking at doing any work over at like maybe more degraded sites like Sligo
Mhm.
Creek?
Yeah, yeah. So that was part of that framework of looking at, the EDRR species, the protecting our assets and also community needs. So our two sites that we selected for our pilot this year are Cottage City and Rhode Island Trolley Trail. So Cottage City was partially selected because we've already have a very active green team working there. We have a lot of people utilizing that site. It's in an area of underinvestment. And so we want to really put some time and effort into making that area safer, and it's right along the Anacostia River Trail, and CCAN was working there. So there was like a bunch of boxes that got checked, and we are like, let's try to manage part of the thing at Cottage City. We can't do the whole site, but we're trying to push some of those invasives back so volunteers can start to access some of those trees more in the interior, and get to some of the more interior invasives that there's almost like a huge barrier to get to. And then there's some invasives like Japanese knotweed that's at the site that I just won't be able to do myself at all. And that's where we're using those contractors. So yeah, we're trying to not just focus on the best of the best areas, but also areas where people are using, and we have other needs. We have some other spots like there's a spot where bamboo, the very dense bamboo is creating unsafe conditions for some of our park visitors. So that's another one that's kind of high up there because of what's happening around the bamboo stands. So
This is Walter. So is there, how do we get announcements for your different places that you're doing things for those that are interested?
yeah, so I just posted, and the link is at the end of the Wakelet, but I also just posted in the chat in response to Kathy Stewart about, trying to find out my updates. So I have a form. I haven't sent anything out to those folks who've signed up yet, but I'm hoping as soon as I get some better dates like set, I will send that information out. So I'll send out invasive species updates, including like work days and things like that. And then I'm also hoping to send out some alerts about some of these EDRR species or things that are just popping up that, you guys can learn a little bit more about and keep informed on. So
Okay.
Um, Carrie, is that again? one of the things I really like about Montgomery Park's Weed Warrior program or the volunteer office is they have like a calendar of events where we would have like non-weed warriors could, join us, or maybe some weed warriors that when you eventually get weed warriors can join us, and that we sort of just helps us recruit new people. Are you all going to have like do you all have like a volunteer services office that could help, you know, push out announcements if we want to do a project that we are going to manage?
Mhm. Yeah,
So
yeah, we have a volunteer services and it uses Samaritan, which is the same volunteer system that you all have to sign up on
okay.
with the Montgomery side. It's just that our two systems don't talk to one another. So, uh, but yes, we have very similar volunteer services. We can send out like calendar events. We have like our social media and things like that. We can also send stuff out at. So that can also help with that recruitment of people.
Kerry, are you working at all with our partner organization, the friend, don't tell me, the Neighbors of the Northwest Branch? Because it's, the confluence of the two is right down there in what, Hyattsville, or the edge of Hyattsville. And
Yeah, I actually just had someone from the Friends of Northwest branch reach out to me either last week or the week before. And we exchanged some emails, but we haven't finished on like what we're going to do in terms of getting together and talking and all of that. But yeah, I have a contact now, and other organizations that I'm a little newer to the county because I was at the state level for a while. So the local organizations I really would like to know more about.
yeah, I don't know, Ed, I think we have a lot of crossover between
Yeah,
Weed Warriors and
we work together a lot. Some of weed warriors don't tend to just focus on one watershed. We help Neighbors of Northwest Bridge. I don't know if it was Scott Zilmer that you were working with. Um,
I'm trying to pull up the name.
I've helped him out on some of his projects. We've worked up and down the Northwest Branch, and I think we have some of the Neighbors of Northwest Branch, people of the Northwest Branch uh, weed warriors who are very active helping us in Sligo Creek. So we do a lot of crossover, which is great.
Yeah, it
Um,
was Melissa. That
oh,
was
Melissa. Okay, yeah, I know Melissa. Um, one thing I'm hoping is that we can get some coordination about your EDRR. Like those Italian arums. We're very aware of it sweeping down Sligo Creek Park, and I guess it's heading to uh, PG parks. And I'm hoping that we could, I don't know, maybe you could lend a voice in trying to get Montgomery Parks to help stem that tide.
Yeah, I
Because
saw that.
it's a frustration of ours that sometimes they don't see it as a priority in Sligo Creek.
Yeah, it's hard to work on all the things. And I think my slight advantage is that I'm starting out new. So I'm like, ERR is going to be one of my big focuses for trying to remove stuff and all of that. Whereas they have an established program that's like 30 years old, and they have a little bit different expectations from their leadership and everything. But I was looking at that invader detectors prism map that on iNaturalist, and I noticed like the Italian arum in Sligo's watershed basically like stopped close to Montgomery. And I was like, is that just because people aren't reporting it on our side? Or I don't know. But I was looking at that right before tonight, and it was just like, oh, I should think about what's happening upstream from us. So yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a whole lot of reporting on the Montgomery side. When we've had work trips down on the Prince George's side, um, because there hasn't been anybody to report to or whatever else, unless we see something new. Which I guess that's where I first started seeing the 5-leaf akebia,
Mhm.
the West Hyattsville Metro Station. We tend just tend to pull it out. You know, we don't, it's like, okay, we've seen this before. So without some feedback about, oh yeah, let us know,
Mhm.
you know, the things that you mentioned, we've seen all over, and, you know, we just work on them, and, you know, you don't report them anymore because you've seen them, you've seen them so many places.
Yeah.
Except, you know, and then I think for my part, I've been interested in trying to map, so like the Akebia or map knotweed, to show the extent, to let, you know,
Mhm.
parks and other people know. It's like, wow, this is really growing. This is bad. You know, it needs to be managed, or else it's everywhere. But, you know, but we understand. I mean, I think you did a great job of showing the priorities of the parks is these, you know, these very special areas, that, you know, use a lot of resources for good reason. Something like Sligo Creek, which is, you know, just you know, it's very urbanized. It gets dug up periodically for wastewater, you know, I mean, anyway, so it's very disturbed and hard to think about using a whole lot of resources on that,
Mhm.
because, you know, you only have so many. So I, you know, we certainly understand that, but it's a management issue. You know, this is like, how do we make these so that it's, well, at least these areas, as you said, are safe, and we preserve the trees that we have so far.
Yeah.
So,
And I'll say too, on the Montgomery side, they have a lot more restrictions in terms of herbicide usage and all of that with local laws and everything. And so I know certainly coming in my position, there's this whole like pesticide-free park initiative and stuff like that. And it was written with turf grass management primarily in mind, because we didn't have an invasive species program or any of that, like, you know, at least a large scale program, which is what I'm trying to launch. It was just people taking groups out here and there and trying to deal with some of the issues. So I'm trying to be very careful too with the pesticide usage and be very mindful of how I'm talking to leadership about it, because there are concerns about herbicide usage as well. But we know that in our invasive species toolbox, it's one of those tools that has to be used at certain times. And so, so Montgomery has it a little bit differently in terms of what they can and cannot do. And I'm trying to be very careful because I don't want to lose that privilege uh, of being able to use the herbicides when it's really needed in some of these situations. And so one of my goals is putting together these best management practices that that we'll use with some of our management staff, of like time of year to spray these things. What's, you know, the best method? Like most of them, it's labor intensive. It's that cut stem method where you're literally cutting the stem and applying that herbicide to the stem. And that's where I'm like, the volunteer groups like you all with Weed Warriors are going to be amazing asset, because you're helping to cut it, and then we can bring in the paid staff who are certified to use those herbicides to maybe hopefully come in like afterwards and treat those areas. That's my goal, but you know, I haven't had to apply this in such a large system yet. So
yeah,
I will say there's a lot of like optimism in my eyes at the
right,
moment. So
right. So other questions for Kerry? Well, we have your, you know, your email address, and certainly be great, yeah, to sign up for these, because we're eager. We have, you know, different groups on different days that, although, you know, people tend to like to not to go too far, but you know, we'd love to see some of these other areas, and make a morning or an afternoon of it, usually morning, cooler weather. So yeah, so please, you know, send us announcements and things like that, so that we
yeah,
can.
and we just got a very large grant to plant a bunch of trees at Lake Arbor, which is a golf course, the former golf course that we purchased not too long ago, and we're trying to reforest a large portion of it. It's along the western branch and of the Patuxent, so a nice, a very ecologically significant river system that's just like totally open in parts because of this old golf course.
Hmm.
So that like we just got the grant and we're going to be planting a bunch of trees, but I need to clear invasives from the edge before we plant those trees. So I definitely know that's going to be a high priority site if some of you got want to come out from the Sligo watershed and coming over to the Patuxent side. That hopefully, hopefully I will get the go that I can start arranging those work days soon. So. Kathy,
Kathy's
you
got
got a
a
question?
question.
Yeah, I had put two questions in the chat. Is there a native Persicaria with white flowers?
There are some, yeah. So the native jump seed, the American jump seed has white flowers.
Okay, because I have that growing in my little forest, mini forest across
Yeah.
the street from me. So I want to make
Okay.
sure.
Yeah,
And
as long as it doesn't have those bright red splotches later in the year.
yeah, so we have some of that too, because I think the painter's palette got, they were selling it for a while as a native, and it turned out
Yep,
not to be.
yep.
So I'm
Yeah,
having to, yeah.
that was a big
But
oopsie.
but we do have the native then. So also, my other question was about Bradford pear. How are you addressing that? Because that is spreading
Yeah.
everywhere.
That's one of those, it used to be it was the Prince George's County tree for a time there. So,
Oh,
because it was developed at BARC, the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. And then they made it the county tree and they planted it everywhere, including headquarters where I live at or work at right now. So Bradford pear, in my eyes, is kind of like lesser celandine, stiltgrass, and all of that. In some of these areas where you have these heavy infestations, we've lost the battle. And so if you've got smaller infestations or priority spots that you want to manage, yes, you do have to cut an herbicide. I tried like aggressively cutting one that's seeded into my yard, but it keeps re-sprouting. So I'm going to have to break down and use the herbicide in my yard too,
Yeah,
on it. So yeah.
that's one of the things one of the things I was proposing. In of course, Montgomery Parks wants to focus on the areas that aren't as invaded yet, but if volunteers could get out there, it's hard. The Bradford pear is hard to see after it flowers, or until the fall when it gets the color. If people could go out and put tape or spray paint or something on them in the spring when they flower, and then parks can come along or somebody can come along and cut and herbicide them later. I was
Mhm.
thinking that might be something that a teamwork type approach to, because I'm hoping that once they're herbicided, that can really help get rid of them.
Yeah, the problem is just like in some of these areas, the seed source. So our new Largo headquarters, which we just moved into in March, there's a big area that used to be a meadow. From the aerials, they mowed it up at least 5 years ago, but then they stopped mowing it when the property got sold. And now it is a Bradford pear forest, which is very horrifying to me in the spring, like driving in and just seeing all the white. And my coworkers are like, well, what are you going to do about that? And I'm looking at our parking lot, which is all Bradford pear. The
Oh
entire
no.
road leading up to our building is Bradford pear. And I was just like, I don't really see managing this circular area for Bradford pear because it's just going to be a continual management nightmare. In terms of like unless I get rid of all these seed sources close by, it's just going to continue seeding back in. And so that's one of the decisions we've got to make at some of these sites with some of these species. Look at where the plants are coming in, and that's going to be factoring into some of the priority matrix, because some of these sites and all of that are going to require year after year maintenance. And so I don't want to dump a bunch of money, walk away, and then have it just go to crap again in 5 years. So I want to try to keep them the best I can when I can. So some of that will be that decision process, and how many Bradford pears are there, the importance of the site, and things of that I'll have to use to figure out if it's worth it.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Right, well, we should probably let her go so that she can eat dinner or whatever, whatever else, but,
It's
yeah,
ice cream time.
we certainly appreciate that, and it's just such a, you know, a relief or whatever, I don't know, it's so great to have someone on the Prince George's side. I mean, you've got, as you said, it's a little laughable. Um, I mean, just, you know, there's so much to do and such a big, but as you said, you have these great resources and, you know, I mean, it's, you know, you'll do what you can do. So we're glad to help you. Just let's, send us whatever you can and we'll, you know, we'll try to keep in touch and
Yeah.
not overload you with different things, because I mean, we could tell you, okay, we're coming over, but you know, I mean, that just uses up your time to go, okay. I mean, you know, there's nothing you need to do. So,
Yeah.
as you said, Meredith with CCAN has been doing a lot. And, you know, we tried to support her efforts so far. So I'm glad to hear that that's still in the present tense, that her funding hasn't been pulled, because that was the big
Yes.
question.
Yeah, they're the as of, you know, mid-May, they still are funded and all of that. So yeah, anything that I can do to help with your different programs and stuff like that. And I'm a general wildlife nerd, nature nerd, and all of that. So you don't have to just like stick to plant stuff if you talk with me. And our ranger unit is amazing as well. They're the ones who've been really picking up a lot of this work back over the years, you know, but there hasn't been a large coordinated effort until now. And so so we do have rangers who are helping out with those types of stuff and other projects. So I can connect you with those folks on our side as well if there's interest.
And I guess, so if we do work on the PG side, do we need a letter of, you know, saying we're allowed to do it, or do you want to know about it, or what? I mean, just as a parting word, we could follow this up offline.
For now, unfortunately, it has to be a little bit longer process. We have this right of entry process, which is what Meredith is doing and all of that. I'm trying to get that changed. But and then also the other thing is I'm trying to acknowledge the folks who've had the training on the Montgomery Park side to be able to start doing the work on our side. And these are because it's all new to the people that I'm working with, and I'm in the planning side, not in the natural resources section. It's a little scary for some folks at the moment. So I'm
Okay.
trying to bring people along with baby steps, and they need a little more hand holding until they feel comfortable having folks just start doing the work on our side. So
Okay.
so
Well, then, okay, well.
yeah, so for right now, the established partners that have those permits, Meredith with CCAN, Anacostia Watershed Society has those different permits. And I'm trying to think, Community Native Planting Partnership. We've got a few groups that are already working with us that you might be able to like team up with if you don't
Okay.
want to go through that process, or hopefully, like, I'm hoping by fall I can start saying, yes, you can start doing work in our parks. But yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you as well. Have a great night.